So, good afternoon, everybody. How are you guys? Excellent, excellent, excellent. I'm so very excited to be here. I want to give you a couple of remarks and then talk a little bit about administration before we go ahead and dive right into the content for this evening's lessons and conversations. How about that? My name is Eric Peguero, and I have the privilege and the honor of leading our training function within Scripps. What that means is that my team and I have responsibility for the education and ensuring that the skills and the knowledge that are needed to do our job exists in each one of our 5,000 plus employees. We do a lot of different types of training, from technical training to leadership and management training. So I am really excited, and I was really excited when Robin asked me to take a look at this content and put something together for you. Because quite frankly, anyone in any organization could benefit from tips on how to run better and more effective meetings. So the way that I facilitate meetings and sessions like this one, training sessions like this one, is really all about conversation. And so I'm expecting that you will contribute to my learning experience, as I hope I can contribute to yours, and that you can share in your experience so that then everybody here can learn from one another. So that is truly facilitation. And so we will go ahead and have conversation, share of our experience, and make sure that we are all learning from each other. So a couple of tidbits about myself. I have been in the training world for over 22 years. I have seen a lot of great trainings, and I have seen some that suck, just like meetings. And so I hope that I don't make the latter for you, but that I really make it as fun as I possibly can. I grew up in Puerto Rico. That's where my accent comes from, and I put that one right off the bat because I don't want people to spend time sort of trying to figure out from where does the accent come. And, you know, I tell you, now you know. Let's move on to the content. So let's go ahead and get going. Why are we here? Well, just like the description that we sent to you before, we do know that meetings suck, and let's just face the fact. So let's think about a meeting, let's protect the innocent as well, and think about a meeting that you attended recently, and think about what made it painful, okay? Yeah. So think about what made that meeting painful. You can steal from the slide, or you can just come up with your own thing. But think about something that made that meeting painful. And when you're ready, give me your name and shout it out loud. Jordan, go ahead.
There's no structure. It's just keep walking in circles.
Thank you for getting us started. Who else? Yes, Gloria.
Pressure on this one. It didn't end on time.
Ah!
And it didn't start on time.
Well, can I tell you that one of my latest things now is, and Robin, cover your ears, if the meeting says that it ends at 1, even if I don't have something after work, because I will have probably work waiting at my desk or emails waiting at my desk, I'll say, I have to go to my next meeting. And I'll just walk out. That was the ending time. I have plans for the next hour. So, okay, what else? Who else? Joan.
People are having sidebar conversations.
Okay.
Okay, when I'm David, it's
David, thank
people
you.
not saying what's really on their mind.
Not speaking up, okay.
It usually comes out after the meeting.
And probably like in sidebar conversations, yeah.
My latest
Steve.
pet peeve is conference rooms not having good enough microphones for teleconferences.
Ah,
Driving me crazy.
who hasn't shared anything?
When there's a meeting around food, so you spend most of your time eating.
Food dominates.
That's a good meeting.
All food, no content. I like it.
I got it.
Especially if there's beer.
I get it. Yes.
I think as a leader, it's difficult to know how much to let people talk and be involved versus cutting them out off and sticking with the agenda so that you finish on time. So.
And is it meta?
Meetup.
Meetup, thank you. Shannon.
Shannon, yeah, Shannon. Okay, so I have a couple. One is reliance on technology and cell phone usage when it's not related to the meeting. So somebody's texting or stuff on Facebook while you're trying to meet. And the other is just meeting for meeting's sake. Like a lot of times I feel like you have a regular meeting on a calendar, so we'll get calls together and we're like, what are we here? And nothing really gets accomplished.
Yeah. Did everybody contribute at least one? Joe, Sherman, anything that comes to mind that hasn't been said already? Don't want to force you, but.
People get cell phone messages in the middle.
Chwing!
I better make sure mine's off.
Yeah, no kidding. That would have been funnier. That would have been funnier. Covered?
Eric, I would just add that I feel like at a meeting there needs to be next steps. Maybe not regular, but I just need to know what happens next. If there is nothing, why do we meet?
Well, and then that leads to the no agenda, no summary, and
Excellent. Well, I'm glad that you guys shared these with me as a form of introduction. I really appreciate it, and I hope that throughout the entire time that we spend together today, we'll be able to address some of these. I know, having seen the content and preparing for it, that we're going to cover about a good 90%. The other 10%, then let's go ahead and have a conversation and see if I don't cover it throughout the time that we chat. Let's make sure that we touch base at the very end and say, okay, let's have a quick conversation. How would we address the one that's missing? Okay? Fair? Excellent. So today's learning objectives. I shared these with you before, and I think that Joan shared them out. Is really to define and set appropriate desired outcomes for your meetings. It really talks a lot about preparing and setting up the stage so that there is an outcome to why you're meeting. And that way we can avoid meetings for meeting's sake. Constructing an agenda that yields results. It's not just necessary to have an agenda, but it is important to have an agenda that gets you somewhere. Because if you have an agenda that A, does not get respected, or B, is not constructed well, you end up with circular conversations. You end up with a lot of sidebar conversations with people not being able to express their opinion, and that could be very harmful to your objectives. And then last but not least, describe and select the appropriate decision-making model. And I bring this as part of meeting management and making meetings more effective, because most often when we get into a meeting, we seem to lose who needs to be making a decision and why. And so we will talk about this as a mode of meeting management, but I will also bring it as part of meeting preparation. So as you start taking a look at meetings, perhaps you can take a look at it like a diamond from another facet, and then say, okay, so before I go to a meeting, I need to think about decision-making models and how do we approach it all together, okay? So the discussion outline. So today's discussion outline, the entire session today is divided into two big chunks, just so that you know when we make the bend from one to the other one, we are more than halfway there. The first part of the conversation is going to be about the prep. We will talk about building desired outcomes. We will talk about pre-work and the importance of pre-work for meetings. Pre-work is not just for college courses or trainings. And then we will talk about agenda and say, why do we need them? Many people tend to go, why do I need it? I have it all in my head. Maybe not so much. So we'll talk about the importance of that. Then we will talk about the concept of what happens while we're in flight. So we are now facilitating a meeting, or we're leading a meeting, and what happens in the middle of it. These two people, Jordan and David, are having a sidebar conversation, and I need to be sure that I can listen to Ben. How do I address this, and how do I call the moment so that this sidebar conversation adds to Ben's point or then can be taken outside? So we'll talk a lot about some tools to use to make meetings a lot more effective and more focused that way. Okay? Alrighty, so before we begin though, I need to give credit where credit is due. I mentioned earlier that a lot of these concepts come from a training that I went through in 1994. This again changed all of the way that I looked at meetings and the way that I run a lot of sessions altogether. So a lot of the concepts are based from ideas from Interaction Associates, and the name of the course is Facilitative Leadership. I want to put that out there so that you know where it comes from, and in case you want to do additional research or want to suggest in your mentorship or coaching for someone to go to a great training, I certainly would recommend this one. They're still around, and they're still running the exact same training. So I certainly have augmented a lot of the content with my experience over the last 20 years. So I will certainly bring and share with you how some of these things have worked and how some of them really are a little dangerous to try. So I'll give you a little bit of a heads up here and there every so often. Okay? Okay. So let's talk about the prep. It's all in the prep. As I mentioned earlier, most of what we do and most of the effectiveness of a meeting happens in the prep. You would never, and Joan and I were talking about theater earlier, you would never be in a play without rehearsing with your fellow actors, would you? And I find it funny that most people then go into a meeting without ever taking a look at what is it that they want to accomplish and or prepare. I cannot tell you, and I want to see certainly your faces when I share this, because I wonder how many of you would relate. How many times I have arrived to a meeting and the person who's leading the meeting says, "What are we supposed to be doing here today?" Has that happened to you? Yeah? Yeah? How do you feel about that?
Walk out.
Yeah, yeah. I often feel that way. Yeah. Like, seriously? Spend at least 5 minutes before the top of the hour just getting your thoughts together. Or don't even say that. Don't even say that phrase. What are we supposed to be doing here today? Because that doesn't help. So it's all in the prep. So again, let's go ahead and take a look at how important it is and how we can prep by taking a look at desired outcomes, how pre-work becomes a part of your preparation work, and everybody's, for that matter. And then we'll take a look at agendas and construction, and we have some exercises in both of these areas. Has anybody ever heard about desired outcomes? Like the phrase desired outcome. What is a desired outcome? One? Couple. Okay, good, great. Let's go ahead and give it an operational definition. Let's just define it all together, and I want you to add to that definition as well. Okay, so a desired outcome is what the meeting aims to achieve. It's really the expected result of the meeting. Okay, simple as that. What are the desired outcomes of the given meeting? And any given meeting can have more than one desired outcome. A short meeting can have more than one desired outcome too. So don't think about it in quantity or anything to that effect. There are two types of outcomes. One is the product outcome, which is, well, we need to come up with a list. We need to come up with a decision. We need to come up with an agreement. Those are tangibles, things that once you walk out that door, you would say, I have this list, I have this decision made, I have this agreement done. And then the second one is the intangible, is really the knowledge. It's an understanding of or an awareness of. That's a little bit harder to quantify once you exit the door. So we'll talk a little bit about what to do when you have an intangible, such as, well, you need to have an understanding of how the process works so that blah, 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 blah can happen, okay? Desired outcomes have a brief written statement, so usually they are also highlighted at the very top of your agenda, and they are communicated to participants ahead of time. Over my last 20 years, I've gotten into the habit of putting the desired outcomes in the invitation of a meeting. So if you're using Outlook Calendar or something to that effect, it's a great thing just to put the desired outcomes right then and there. That way people have them way ahead of time, even if you haven't had a chance to write your agenda out. They know what is it that the meeting is seeking to accomplish. And they are specific and measurable. I mentioned earlier, you walk out the door, you can still say, yes, I have that list. Yes, I have that agreement. Yes, I have that understanding. And lastly, from my perspective of all of the desired outcomes are built from the perspective of the participant. Even though they may be coming from the leader or from the facilitator, you still want to make sure that the participant at the meeting has been able to grab that. The desired outcomes and the agendas for my team meetings are communal. So that means that all of my team members actually bring to the agenda their desired outcome and their agenda topic. Somebody puts the agenda together, but the desired outcomes and the agenda have been contributed by everybody. So that's a great way of doing it. So we have a common working space, so we put all of our information there. Canvassing people is a great, great tool. Again, it's part of the prep. What would make it really difficult if you did it when?
The start of the meeting.
At the start of the meeting, correct. Exactly. At that point in time, well, great, Karen. I haven't had a chance to think about it. And then you haven't been able to even make space in the agenda for that particular item. So, yeah. So great addition to the prep. Okay, let's talk briefly then about the little sidebar that I wanted to have around the knowledge piece, an understanding of and awareness of. What do the words "so that" would add to the following statement? So I want you all to have an understanding, so a desired outcome is for you to have an understanding of the process on how to write a check so that. What do the words "so that" do to my statement?
Creates a reason for needing to learn this. Why would I care? This is why I should care about this.
What kind of reason? It touches you? Is it tangible or intangible? Tangible. So I need you to have an understanding, at the end of this meeting, I need you to have an understanding on the process of how to write a check so that you may pay your bills. So it's quantifiable, it makes it tangible altogether. But the whole concept of understanding the process is fairly intangible because I'm going to have a hard time measuring that just by looking at Joan right now. Did she get that process or did she not? But I will be able to measure whether she will be able to pay her bills or not, right? If you cannot come up with a "so that," guess what that does to your agenda item? Correct. So I want you to think about meetings that you may have coming up or meetings that you had just recently. And I want you to think about a desired outcome that you could construct for that meeting. So let's talk about some of those.
An agreement.
An agreement on what, Joan? Let's try to make okay, that's fair. Let's try to make the examples as real life as we can.
A plan for the next 3 months. An action plan. Use that word. Action.
I will add it in here again. David.
At a meeting on establishing a process for coming up with our focus area.
So an established process for?
Establishing a process.
What else?
Selling price of new project.
What else?
Getting feedback from key stakeholders.
What else?
Getting people to do their to-dos, their next steps. Getting volunteers to actually engage in the project.
What else?
Get an organization to agree to be a sponsor. Followed by getting individuals to agree to become partners.
Okay, since I ran out of space, and we seem to all have hit a trend on the getting, let's go ahead and talk about these. So I don't know if you noticed that when I put the title of the flip chart, I did it after I started taking notes, and I put a question mark at the end. Let's go ahead and evaluate these. Did they pass some of our tests? Because I think that we all kind of got the idea of what a desired outcomes are. Quick test that I don't know that I mentioned to you. The quickest test that you have is that a desired outcome is a noun. A noun. N-O-U-N. A desired outcome is a noun because a noun is a thing. So a desired outcome is not a verb, is a noun. Quick test. Garen is laughing because why is that? Because we have tons of verbs, right? So let's go ahead and evaluate. So the first one was an agreement on Is there a noun in there? Where is it? Agreement. Okay, so we can walk out, we can go home with an agreement, right? Somebody can put it in writing. Hopefully they will put it in writing. Somebody will put it in writing. But you walk out with that agreement. An action plan for the next 3 months. Is there a noun in there? Where? Plan. So we can walk out with a plan. Go home with a plan, right? Great. Establishing a process for. Process. Here would be my one improvement on this. Our CEO always talks about speak English, right? Why encumber it with things? You want to walk out with a process. It's a process, period, end of story. By the way, I love process. I just want to let you know that. Selling price of new project. Okay. So here selling would be just the adjective or the qualifier. Okay, got it. Excellent. When I wrote it down, I paused. I don't know if you saw me. I paused. I went.
Yeah, you could say price.
Just a price, sure. But if it is for the selling price, then it is the selling price. Feedback from key stakeholders. Yeah. Okay, let's talk about these 4. So let's talk about them. Are these nouns? No. Okay. So this is where we need to be careful. So when we talk about desired outcomes, I'm being able to walk out of the room with those things in your hand, getting somebody to do something. And by the way, no offense to the first person who said it, and I don't remember anymore. But getting sounds like you're strong-arming, right? And that's probably not the best idea for an agenda that welcomes and invites people to participate. So just a thought. You may want to rephrase these. So if it is people to do their to-dos, really, that's probably, another word for that, it would be an agreement that people will follow up on those, right? Yeah? So maybe it's an agreement on next steps, agreement on tasks, on getting folks to do their tasks, and we'll see that.
Part of an action plan.
Yeah, or part of an action, yes, good, or part of an action plan. Getting volunteers too, I think it's probably around the same thing. It's just getting an agreement that people will follow up. And if you have the agreement and somebody took notes on the meeting and it got documented, then at least we have it somewhere. And then we can always go back to it. So a desired outcome is a and not a. Excellent. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about pre-work. We talked a lot about what happens in meetings at times and how sometimes what is happening in the meeting need not happen in a meeting. So if Shannon and I are having a disagreement that is just Shannon and myself and it has nothing to do with a meeting, why are we having it in front of everybody else? So those situations need to be taken outside. Pre, post, or even during. You guys continue. Shannon, let's go discuss something else, right? Sometimes what happens in meetings too is that we find ourselves doing all of this work that could have been done before, and then we can come to the table better informed and ready to take action. So to the whole concept of board meetings, and this is again when I was a member of a board and I had to run the board meetings, I tried to figure out what work needed to be done ahead of time so that the meeting was spent. Action, agreement, plan, brainstorm list, move. It's all about the outcome altogether. So if there is a report, a financial report that needs to be reviewed, if there is a book that needs to be read, if there is anything that needs to happen so that we do something else, could we take the understanding, the awareness, that information, and do it ahead of time? Could we ask our participants to take 5 minutes to read an email, to read a report, and then come prepared with their ideas on? That would be the recommendation, and that's the importance of pre-work altogether. Determine, the pre-work is always determined after the desired outcomes. So come up with the desired outcomes first, and then look at your desired outcomes and say, out of this, what could be done ahead of time that could make my meeting more effective? And then determine, what is that pre-work? How soon does it have to be distributed? So if it's a financial report, can I distribute it a week or two ahead of time? If I distribute it the day before, am I really giving people enough time, or will I have to make time in the meeting then to review it because I didn't have it ready in time? So things of that nature are important, and you need to think through them before you go ahead and put them onto your agenda. And then what would happen if none of the pre-work is done ahead of time? So if I ask everybody to review a report, nobody has an opportunity to review it, we come to the meeting and we were supposed to make a decision. Are you prepared for the consequences? To say, well, we cannot make the decision today because nobody read the report, or now I have to restructure my entire agenda because we have to review the report together so that we can make the decision. Does that make sense? Okay. So moving along then, an agenda is really a roadmap from which you can consciously deviate. I want to highlight a couple of items on that sentence. So if the desired outcomes is what you hope to accomplish in a meeting, if the desired outcomes is what you hope to accomplish in a meeting, your agenda is the roadmap, right? How you're going to get to those desired outcomes. It is not how you're going to get to decide where you're going to dinner with your partner the next day. It is how you're getting to those desired outcomes. So if there's anything in the agenda that does not get you there, doesn't belong in that agenda. Even a team builder belongs in an agenda if it propels you to achieve the desired outcomes of that meeting. Okay? So additional discussions don't belong in the agenda, and therefore allow and help the facilitator to manage them out along the way in the meeting. Now, that's the first thing, roadmap to get to the desired outcomes. Second one, that you can consciously deviate. Some people have accused me of saying, oh God, you come so buttoned up with an agenda to this meeting. Yeah, but because of that, I can tell you where I can deviate. And if one thing runs long, I know where I need to squeeze somewhere else to say, okay, we can let the conversation flow here for a second, and I'm going to cut time over here. And I know, because I prepared, where that can happen. So you can consciously deviate from your agenda if you have an agenda or a roadmap in place. Make sense? Okay, so let's take a look at the sample agenda that I have just given you. In this particular meeting, the title of this meeting is a meeting title, right? So at the very top, you need to put the meeting title. It needs to be clear, it needs to be descriptive. So you need to be able to say this is the education committee for the social venture partners time. So have it at the top so that if somebody picks it up, very top, we have it. You need to be able to have the date and the time of the meeting so that we know exactly where it is, even if you're giving it to someone. But better yet, if you distribute it ahead of time, then at least they will have it in one place and they can print the agenda and bring it with them if they need to. So month, the date, the year, and then the timing. This one takes place from 1 to 2, and I had to put times because of what happens later. The name of the location and under the conference room. Put an address if it's applicable, and certainly put a phone number either of the person facilitating or the space so that people can call in case they get lost. And believe me, people even get lost in conference rooms looking for a conference room in a building. And or if you have a conference call line, then you would put it in here. The top header of this is all about the logistics, and you want to be as clear as possible so you have no mistakes, not people arriving late or anything to that effect. I always put the pre-work right immediately following, which is ironic because I just said pre-work comes right after what? You have to do your desired outcomes in your head, in your paper, and then you come up with pre-work, and I always put it at the very top. Why do I do that? So that people know that there's pre-work for this meeting. So if you distribute the agenda ahead of time, pre-work is right on top, come prepared. So insert any pre-work that you may have there. And then go into the desired outcomes and make sure that you have these in here. So it's an agreement on the rules of engagement on the agenda. It's an understanding of, so that it's a list of, it's an agreement of, on, it's a plan for, and it's agreement on next steps and follow-up tasks. I mentioned earlier, if you send out an invitation via email or if you send out a calendar Outlook invitation, whether at work or personally, consider sending the desired outcomes ahead of time so that people know why you're calling them to the meeting. It is important because I cannot tell you the number of meetings that I have been invited where I have no clue what I'm going to be doing there because the title is not descriptive, there's nothing in the body, and I go, okay, and guess what? If I have competing invitations, and it happens a lot to us, when we have competing invitations, two people schedule a meeting for the exact same time, even though the calendar showed busy, pet peeve, I will decline the one that doesn't have desired outcomes. because I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing there, whereas I know what I'm supposed to be doing there. I have to pick and choose. So that's something that guides people. So consider putting those ahead of time. Below the desired outcomes, then we have the agenda. You will notice that this agenda is constructed with 5 columns. What is it that we need to accomplish? How is it that we're going to accomplish it? Who is going to do it? When is it going to happen? And then the objective. The objective ties directly to one of the desired outcomes. If you go one line by line, you have agreement, an understanding, a list, agreement, a plan, and agreement. Every line item corresponds to a desired outcome. There's nothing extraneous, nothing that will take us away from what we need to achieve. Fair? It's simple math, 1 for 1. If you find yourself having an agenda item that doesn't have a desired outcome, guess what? Kick it out to the curb. The agenda item doesn't belong there. Although sometimes I have found an agenda item, I'm like, oh crap, I forgot the desired outcome. So then I go back and I put the desired outcome in place. So just make sure that you have something that's tangible and that they match 1 for 1. Alrighty, a quick question. Before we go through the columns, let's take a look at the 4th column in. Do you see anything funny about that? How long is my meeting?
55 minutes now. basically.
Well, according to the top of this thing,
Oh, I see.
it's an hour.
Sorry, a
So
lot of people do
this is my latest little trick. So I actually, in order for me to be able to keep track of time as I am facilitating my meeting, I will start the meeting down here 5 minutes late, just so that then I can continuously look at my watch and match the time with this. Because inevitably, every meeting, even if everybody's on time, the chit chat at the beginning will make you start your meeting late. Let's take a look at what, how, who, and an objective. You know, the what I mentioned earlier, they're all match the objectives. Here in this particular what, it's 10 minutes because we would do a welcome and we do introductions just like we did here. In this particular case, we have the rules of engagement. It's another way of saying ground rules. And sometimes in a meeting, especially if you're about to make a lot of decisions, you may want to start, your facilitator may want to start with the whole concept of what are the rules of engagement for this conversation. We're going to be honest. We're going to avoid sidebar conversations. To David's point earlier, we're going to be able to, you know, treat each other with respect. Technology is going to be off and off the tables, et cetera, et cetera. So rules of engagement are important. If you have committees that work for a long period of time, you may want to devote a longer period of time to just brainstorm those at the very beginning and then have them even highlighted here. So you may have attendees at the top and then always include your rules of engagement. And then the agenda review is important, and getting agreement on the agenda is also very important. So just because I wrote it, just because I published it, I am not guaranteed that everybody read it. So I want to make sure that I go through the desired outcomes and the agenda one more time, and I say, does anybody have any issues with the agenda? Please notice that I didn't say, does everybody agree with the agenda? Does anybody have any issues with the agenda? Why did I ask the question that way? To avoid what? Yeah, and we often call it passive agreement, right? So yeah, I will see you all doing this much quicker than going, what did he just say? Right? So instead of just having this, the passive agreement, I'll say, does anybody have any issues with the agendas? Or what issues do you have with the agenda? And ask the question differently so that you can get agreement on the agenda. And then once we get going, we go. Now, can I deviate from the agenda? Yes, we can consciously deviate from the agenda if it's needed and if the group agrees to that. So in this particular case, I assign timing, and another piece that I want to highlight is, before I go to the timing. How? It is important you tell people how is it that we're going to do it. So for the welcome, I'm going to present information to you. I will clarify it as people have questions. I will brainstorm because we have the rules of engagement brainstorm here, remember? We will review the brainstorm, and then we will go ahead and have agreement on the rules of engagement and the agenda. For the pre-work review, we're going to discuss it and clarify it, but we're not going to review it. Notice that I didn't put the review here, right? So we're going to discuss the pre-work and we're going to clarify it, period, end of story. If you have a brainstorm, you want to be able to brainstorm and put that in here. How are we going to come up with options? We brainstorm it. So try to be as descriptive as you can without being step by step, but just to tell people, this will be a time for brainstorm, this will be a time for clarification, this will be a time for discussion. So that people know. If people start discussing, and this happens a lot, so for options, let's brainstorm ideas. The first one comes out the gate, 20 people have opinions about that idea. Is that a brainstorm? No, it's a discussion about that one idea. We're not there yet. So that's the best way to manage a meeting, to say, you know, Garen, thank you so much for that opinion on that. Why don't we table it until we discuss all of the options? Can we continue the brainstorm? Moving on, okay? And then, of course, if you need to narrow down priorities, you have things of that nature. So my suggestion is that you have a column that says, how is it that you're going to achieve that? And you are as descriptive as you can without having to outline step by step. There are usually some typical verbs that I use, and most of them are included in here, as a matter of fact. So you have them as an example. Who? Quick, we'll talk about involvement later, but one of the things that I want to highlight, do you see anything interesting about the who? Facilitator. What about the facilitator?
I guess you recommend a facilitator. It was certainly not the leader, but in every meeting there should be a facilitator.
Not always, but in some cases, probably. If you have a sensitive topic, you may not want the leader to be the facilitator, because then the leader gets into getting people, into getting volunteers, into getting an organization, into getting individuals. That's what the leader gets to do. And so you may need a facilitator who might just say, thank you so much, Todd. Let's go ahead and continue with the desired outcomes. Of course, the facilitator then would have to meet with the leader and make sure that both of them are on the same page. But one of the things that I wanted to highlight here is that often enough, depending on the topic, you might just need somebody who's completely divorced from the situation to help you get the meeting through. Okay? What other things do you notice about the who?
It always changes.
It always changes. Why do you think I would do that? What happens when more than one person is leading a meeting or portions of a meeting? More buy-in, exactly. Increases the involvement. Increases the involvement. Okay? So we have the roles of facilitation and leader. The leader is also taking a place in here, facilitating some of the conversation, maybe some of the pre-work review. And then I had team member number 1. You could have certainly put anybody's name, but maybe at that given point in time I could say, hey Jordan, would you be willing to take care of this particular, the prioritization of the options that we have? And then the facilitator says, okay Jordan, it's your turn, let's go up. Okay. Okay. Keep it going, keep people involved, keep buy-in happening. I want to highlight the when. The when, I mentioned that certainly my little trick about starting at 1:05, but I keep time 2 different ways, and this seems awfully redundant, but trust me, in the thick of things, it becomes very helpful. It's the time according to the watch, so 1:05 to 1:15, but I also say 10 minutes, because sometimes we don't start at 1:05, so then, okay, is the entire agenda off? Well, I know that I have 10 minutes, so I will look at my watch and I'll say, okay, we started at 1:10, so I have 10 minutes for this. I can either cut it short to 5, or I can go for 10 minutes if this is really important. But I can then continuously just do the math in my head as a facilitator and say, this is where I am throughout the piece. So having the duration is also important, just a quick little trick for anybody who needs to facilitate. Okay. The top desired outcome is the rules of engagement and agreement on the agenda. The last one is agreement on next steps and follow-up tasks. You need to carve out time, you need to carve out time for both of those things, the top and the bottom. What happens in the middle can be fluid, but you have to carve out time to the bottom, particularly to the bottom. So if you need to finish make sure that your meeting only goes to 1:50, because inevitably it will go to 1:55, and you will need at least the last 5 minutes to say, what are our next steps? Before we break, we need to agree on next steps. So make sure that you always carve out time at the very end for it, okay? We need to take a little bit of a turn. We're going to talk about approaching topics. Each one of those line items in your agenda still needs to be approached, and we will do it using a specific model called open, narrow, close. We will talk about the decision-making model and talking about maximizing involvement. And then last, we will talk about dealing with difficult situations. So let's talk about these items. Open, narrow, close. You probably have seen this model before. I just want to be able to bring it here. But this is a fairly common model for approaching any topic. Not just a brainstorm, not just an agreement, not a decision-making piece. But every conversation that you have, both personally and professionally, follow this model, believe it or not. When it doesn't, then I think that people get frustrated. Any conversation usually opens with gathering information and ideas. Hi, how are you? Guess what I'm doing? I'm opening. Hi, how are you? I'm gathering information. What is going on? Shannon, why do you look so depressed today? Tell me more about what happened. You're doing well. Oh, great. What's going on in your life that's making your life so happy? That's an open. Once you have enough, and trust me, you will know when you have enough, it is your task to start narrowing down and organizing the information. And so out of everything that you told me how you're doing, then I need to sort of like pinpoint a couple of things in my head and say, yeah, let's talk about, the last time we got together, you told me you were having troubles with your partner. What is that all about? And then you're narrowing down to something very specific. So in narrowing, what we want to be able to do is to eliminate duplicate information. So if you have been brainstorming, if you have been taking a look at options, you want to see what repeats. And you want to kind of cross them out and say, is this, Gloria, is this the same thing as this one? Yeah, Eric, it is, because I know you brought the first one, and I just want to make sure that we said the same thing. If they are, can I eliminate the first one so that we can focus our eyes on the second one? Okay, great. Got a Gloria's agreement to that. We eliminated a duplicate. Now, Jordan, this one looks very similar to this one, but it has something that's different. Are they the same thing or are they different? Well, I just see a little bit of a difference. Okay, fine. If it's just a little bit different, let's just leave them alone. You okay with that? Great. Let's go ahead and do that. We only eliminate duplicates to focus people's eyes on what matters, okay? And then there are tons of prioritization tools. I am going to certainly share 2 of them with you. N/3 is probably one of my favorite. So if we have 21 different options on the table, I'll take 21 and say 21 divided by 3 is? So I want everybody to pick their 7 top priorities. 7. What a random number, right? N/3. Divide the number by 3. Say you pick your 7 top priorities. And then I'll go ahead and say, okay, how many people selected 1? Raise a show of hands. How many people? 5 people. Great. How many people selected 2? Oh, no one. Okay. How many people selected 3? 2. Excellent. How many people selected 4? Whoa. 10 people. Excellent. And you go on and on and on. What has that done? Yes.
Memo and a voice.
Yes. Taking the tension out of any argument that needs to be had. It gives everyone a voice. It helps prioritize. It helps draw energy to certain things. Guess what? Nobody selected critical chair, critical chair on being uncomfortable. So we can say, well, we don't need to pay attention to that. But a lot of people selected number 4. A lot of people selected number 1. And a lot of people selected number 7. So we're going to spend the rest of our time talking about those 3. Is everybody in agreement with that? That's where the energy of this group is. Way of narrowing down. We haven't made a decision. We didn't say we're going with number 4, even though it got the most selections. But it's a way of just narrowing down the field and bringing people to a consensus. The other one is multi-voting. In multi-voting, everybody gets 5 votes. There are 3 rounds. In the first round, everybody gets 2 of their votes. In the second round, everybody gets 2 of their votes. And in their last round, they get 1 of their votes. You can take your 2 votes and put it into 1. You can take your 2 votes and split them. Same concept. So those are the ways that you can certainly do it. If you have any other options, certainly just think about, am I really creating an environment where politics are at play? Am I doing something that will hurt? How can I just kind of bring attention to the important pieces without making everybody sort of feel uncomfortable? And then closing, I said this earlier, negative poll. Instead of saying, does everybody agree, asking the question, is there anyone in this room who has a problem with this agreement? It changes the question. It changes everybody's perspective. It's a great way of starting to close the information and not continue to rehash, to Jordan's earlier point about circular conversations, the argument over and over. Last but not least, and the same manager was the one who always used this all the time. We always think on black and white, either or. It's either these or it's either this or it's either that. This or that. This or that. Could it be both and? So we need to decide on what color to paint that wall. Gloria once said pink. Garen once said yellow. Could it be a yellow and pink striped wall? Why does it have to be pink or why does it have to be yellow? Could the decision be both things? So instead of an either or, could it be a both and? Okay? Okay. Okay. Here is one of my favorite models of all time. And one of the things where I think that we all fall apart is the idea that we go into meetings and we have no idea who's supposed to be making a decision. So in this model, you will see that at the very bottom left-hand corner, you start with very little level of involvement, and you have very little time. So when you have very little time and very little level of involvement, guess what? One person needs to make a decision, and that person needs to make it quick, right? Usually, the leader. So if we have little time and little level of involvement because the decision needs to be made, you probably would go to the head and say, make the decision. However, there are different ways in which you can involve people. You can, a leader can also gather input from individuals and decide. That takes more involvement, and it also takes a little bit more time. And a leader can gather input from the team and decide, but that also takes a little bit more time. It involves people a little bit more because everybody has a voice. A leader could also just say, nope, we're going to decide this by consensus. I am the leader, but my voice is the same value as Joan's voice, as Ben's voice. So we're all going to come to consensus. Consensus takes time, but it makes everybody involved. And then last but not least, the leader could say, I am going to leave you guys to decide. Let me know what your decision is. That certainly empowers people, but it also will take a little bit more time. So it is important that before you go into any meeting, you have the decision-making model that you're going to follow clearly articulated. So to David's point earlier, if he has an agenda and the agenda says that we need to come up to a decision, he needs to be able to say at the very beginning of the meeting, I am going to gather your feedback and I am going to make the decision. Or we're going to make this decision by consensus, which means that in 20 minutes, we all have to come to an agreement, a decision altogether. Okay, couple of closing thoughts. Maximizing involvement is really important. That's the reason why I shared that model with you. So it's a critical lever in empowering others, and we want to make sure that everybody in every meeting feels empowered and feels involved. Otherwise, why in the world am I here? The leader's dilemma is to increase involvement and avoid losing control. So you don't want as a leader to then all of a sudden have everything chaos and mayhem. Clarity is extremely important. That's the latest conversation in my household. Communication, communication, communication. Talk so that we know how you're feeling. Talk so that we know who has control, who has the decision-making power, et cetera, et cetera. There is no one right way to make decisions. So you see there are 5 different models. The importance is to be clear, okay? As a leader, you can decide one of the many models. And a conscious choice is a must. So conscious, and lastly, communication is paramount. Cannot say it enough. The famous phrase is, you can never over-communicate. I totally believe in that, okay? You can only over-communicate if you're communicating babble, but important information can never be over-communicated. All righty. So to close, a couple of ideas on dealing with difficult situations. To Joe's point, and certainly to the conversation that we just had, and we've been demonstrating this quite a bit throughout the evening, we need to be able to accept, legitimize, and deal with or defer. With every problem that gets brought up onto the table or in the meeting, we're human beings. Most often, all we want to do is just be heard, right? So all it could take is for somebody to say, you know what, Sherman, I hear your problem. Why don't we go ahead and document that so that we have it here for posterity? And that way, when we go through the work, we can keep that item open. That could be it. That could be all that Sherman wants. But he has a hard time explaining why this is so important to him. So sometimes accepting and legitimizing the individual's concerns is really important. Regaining focus is key. So at any given point in time, if we're going down a rat hole, somebody has to call the moment. Often the facilitator is the facilitator's responsibility. But if it goes away, it is up to any member of the group to say, you know what, that doesn't sound like will help our desired outcome. Can we put that in a parking lot or table it for later? Can somebody take a note? And then we'll discuss it if we have time at the end of the conversation. Enforcing process agreements and just saying, but we have decided that if somebody said at the beginning the majority rules, and that's what it is, then saying we decided that the majority rules in this case. So can you rally behind the majority's decision? That would be another way of doing it. Boomeranging and using humor is easy, right? Everybody knows that a joke always carries a lot of lightens things up and makes things a little bit more palatable. But boomerang, has anybody ever heard about what boomeranging is in a meeting? It's a question you answer the question with a question. So Steve, you'll ask me, so how would you resolve that problem? And I'd say, that's a great question. What do you think? How do you think we should resolve that problem? Or if you look at me puzzled, I can say, let's help Steve out. How do we think Steve should resolve that problem? So that's a boomerang. And then last, say what's going on. And I missed the K there, my apologies. Say what is going on. So if we start going down a rat hole and we're completely off the agenda, time out. What's going on here right now? We're completely off topic. We're not driving to the desired outcome. What's going on? Seeing what happens from there, okay? It could actually put everybody into their tracks and say, crap, yeah, we're off the agenda and we're really running late. Let's get back into work. Or it could be that Ben had a grievance that hasn't been heard and all he wants to do is just be validated. So it's a way of doing that. Okay? If you guys want feedback on the next agenda you put together or on your desired outcomes, don't hesitate to send them to me. It'll take a few seconds just to read and give you some thoughts. But now you're ready to go meet.